female spies are using that strategy, the honey traps, to seduce tech leaders, even marry them. So seduce them over many, many years, marry them, have kids for the goal of stealing secrets for their governments.
There are more spies in Washington, D.C. than there are anywhere else on the planet. The FBI estimates that there are 10,000 foreign intelligence officers just in Washington, D.C. They weren't intelligence officers, they were just private Chinese citizens going to Chinese dissidents and saying things like, hey, shut your mouth, or I'm going to break your father's ribs when I get back to China, and I'm going to rape your mother.
And why do they still torture if it doesn't work? Not only the US, but other countries as well.
They do speak, but they don't necessarily speak the truth. You're not a substantive expert. 99.9% of it is bullshit. It's just, he's trying to get you to stop torturing, and it takes months for them to finally conclude, this was bullshit, that was bullshit, the other, oh, this part might be true, the rest of this is bullshit.
China's Ministry of State Security accused the NSA of targeting the National Time Service Center.
It could wreck the national banking system.
You've talked about your story a few times on the web. I've been listening to it. First, crazy story. And I listened to your Rogan interview, but the Tucker interview was really interesting.
Thank
What
you.
you've been through is just insane.
It's
So I highly recommend people. It has. I highly recommend people listen to it.
Okay.
What I want to talk to you about is, a few things, but I want to start with the intelligence that the US is facing. Instead of talking about what the CIA and FBI have done, which we'll talk about later, I want to understand what other intelligence organizations, Chinese, Russian, Arab, Mossad, are doing in the US. Because there was a story that came out a few days ago where that one scares me. So I'm in the tech world, I've got a startup in that world. So I work there every day in that world. And I've been to Silicon Valley many times. And I saw a story. I remember my investor, who's my CEO now, he said to me one day, he's like, Mario, careful about honeypots. That was a couple of years ago. I'm like, what are honeypots? When the Epstein story first came out, he started telling me what it is, and I started laughing at him. Then I realized that's one of the most common strategies that intelligence organizations use. And a story that came out a few days ago is in Silicon Valley, female spies are using that strategy, the honey traps, to seduce tech leaders, even marry them. So seduce them over many, many years, marry them, have kids for the goal of stealing secrets for their governments.
It's crazy,
Have
right?
you? Yeah. Can you tell us more about it? How common is it? How well does it work? How big of a risk is it in the US? And I'm just surprised that this is still a strategy that they use, especially with all the technology that we have today.
Yeah. Good questions. Important questions. For the United States, let's get the United States out of the way quickly. That's an easy one. The U.S. does not use honeypots for a variety of reasons. Number one, they rarely work the way you want them to work. Number two, they take a long time to finally come to fruition. When I first joined the CIA in January of 1990 and began going through the training, one of our instructors talked about honeypots. And he said that in the 1970s, we had tried to recruit an Iranian cleric using a honeypot. A honeypot, in this case, was we sent a prostitute to sort of bump into him, to smile nicely, to compliment him, and finally to get him into bed. And he went to bed with her, took off all of his clothes, did the deed. The U.S. had the room wired for video and audio. And so we took hundreds of pictures of him naked in bed with this prostitute. And then we confronted him and we laid out these photographs in front of him with the idea being, do what we say, or we're going to, send these to your wife or to your boss or release them to the media or whatever. And he said, ooh, I'll take an 8x10 of that one and give me 2 5x7s of this one and give me, how about wallet size of this one? And they told us, get out of here. You guys can't intimidate me. And, the leadership of the CIA just decided, what a waste of time and money. And the bottom line is, if people are going to work for you clandestinely, they're going to do it because they like and trust you, not because you threaten them into it, which has been, or not has been, was my case, my conclusion. I say this all the time, I was always the good cop when I was doing operations for the CIA. And so I had success treating people with respect and with dignity. Now, on the other hand, there are a lot of foreign intelligence operations in the United States. There are even advertisements, Mario, on the sides of buses in Washington. There are advertisements for the Spy Museum. And they remind everybody in the ad that there are more spies in Washington, D.C. than there are anywhere else on the planet. The FBI estimates that there are 10,000 foreign intelligence officers just in Washington, D.C. I'll tell you another thing from my very early days at the CIA. And I've said this a number of times, but it bears repeating. When I was on my first week at the agency, all the new hires received a briefing from the CIA's director of security. And he was telling us that the biggest threat to us as CIA officers was the threat of counterintelligence. That would be foreign intelligence services spying on us and trying to recruit us. So he said, as an example, there is a restaurant very close to the CIA called J. Gilbert's. It's a steakhouse, relatively fancy, nice place, good food. He said, don't ever go there. Why? Because the KGB thinks that we all go there. So the place is full of KGB agents at any given time. So let them continue going there. The rest of us go to other restaurants where we won't be molested.
That's crazy.
So little things like that. One of the other things that he told us was, we were talking about the difference. He was teaching us the difference between a declared officer and an undeclared officer. An undeclared officer is someone who the CIA and the FBI are not supposed to know is a foreign intelligence officer and who is in the United States committing espionage. A declared officer is, let's say you work for a foreign intelligence service. Your boss brings you to the CIA and says, gentlemen, this is Mario. He's my new guy. He's an intelligence officer. He'll be here to work with you. That is being declared. So the point of that story was that there was one declared Mossad agent and one declared Shin Bet agent in the Israeli embassy in Washington. But the FBI had identified 187 undeclared Israeli intelligence officers spread all across America to steal our defense secrets from defense contractors.
And that's just the ones that were identified.
Just the ones that were identified by the FBI. So you've got Chinese and Russians and Israelis and whoever else, Iranians,
Is there many European?
For the most part, we don't spy on the Europeans and the Europeans don't spy on us for the most part. But the easy answer is sure. Sure, there are Europeans. Sure.
But nothing compared to... But hold on. Israel is also an ally of the US. Why is Israel not treated the same as the Europeans?
And that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? That's a policy decision. The Israelis spy on us, and then they say, what are you going to do about it? You're going to blow up American politics by, arresting Israeli spies? We arrested Jonathan Pollard in 1995 and gave him 30 years. He did the whole 30. And then when he was released, he moved to Israel, became a member of Likud, and now he's running for the Knesset. So what do? Is it worth throwing a wrench into your foreign affairs? I would say yes, but consecutive presidents have said no.
Wasn't there a story, and I just, there's so much going on that I didn't cover it. Wasn't there a story of a gentleman, I think it was Israeli intelligence, that was caught in the US for child pornography?
Yes.
Then he was released on bail and escaped to Israel. Is that,
yes.
Have you followed that story? What happened exactly?
Yeah, that was 5 or 6 weeks ago. He was an Israeli, government official. He was in Las Vegas. He was arrested for child pornography, got out on bail, went straight to the airport, and flew straight back to Israel before anybody, well, realized what was going on. So that story has several different conclusions. Number one, um, we didn't want a problem with the Israelis, and the Israelis didn't want a problem with us. So we just let him go, and we'll let the Israelis deal with it, and everybody lives happily ever after, except the children that he victimized, of course. The official explanation is the Las Vegas police said that they didn't realize what they had on their hands. Otherwise, they would have not given him bail. They would have turned him over to the FBI. And then the FBI said, well, we don't know what's happening. Nobody told us anything, so it's not on us. My own personal belief is that he was allowed to abscond because it's just not worth the trouble.
How? So when something like this happens, this gonna, you gave two possibilities, two possible scenarios, one being a mistake and one being influence in some way. If we look at the second scenario of it being influence, how would those forms of influence happen? Is it as extreme as threats? I've got this information on you. If you don't get that person released, we're going to release it. Or it's a lot simpler than that. It's like, can you release him? We work together. We've got that relationship. Just let him go. And the U.S. intelligence or FBI or any other authorities would let him go. How do these things work behind the scenes?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. It's usually the latter.
Okay.
Usually somebody from the Israeli embassy, the ambassador, let's say, would go to the White House and say, listen, there was this kerfuffle in Las Vegas. This guy's a bad guy, but we don't want this to impact or influence our broader relationship. Why don't you just quietly let him go? And we promise we'll get some therapy for him. We'll make sure that he goes before some court or something. They'll just tell us whatever we want to hear. And like I said, 99 times out of 100, whoever happens to be in the White House, it doesn't make any difference if it's a Republican or a Democrat. They're going to say, yeah, the broader relationship ought to be protected from this.
Yeah, we've talked about the capabilities of Chinese intelligence versus Russian versus Israeli in the last time we chatted. I want to talk about current forms of spycraft because there's a few stories when it comes to different spies in different countries being caught and being charged in the last 2 weeks. But before that, you mentioned something interesting and something you've spoken about briefly before, and that's various interrogation techniques. Now, I know your stories. Well, you were the one that blew the whistle on U.S. torture back on the war on terror. And that kind of led to everything that you faced since for many, many years. Hats off to you. But
Yeah.
there's something interesting you said from an interrogation perspective is that first you said something I did not know, that interrogation through torture does not work. Because
Mm.
I always, in my mind, when I look at torture techniques, there's always two positions that I have. On one positions, I don't want to harm any other human being. It's just I'm a pacifist. Now the other
Mhm.
side, if you're that leads and there's a movie about it, I think I had also I forgot the actor, not Denzel Washington. I think it's Samuel L. Jackson. Great movie about interrogation techniques. He's interrogating someone. He's a very, very cruel interrogator and torturer. But the reason was to avoid a terrorist attack and many, many people dying. Now you
Right.
said it just doesn't work. So
No.
first, why do you say that? Second, why do they still torture if it doesn't work? Not only the US, but other countries as well. And number three, another thing that you said was very interesting is there's two ways of interrogating. One is through torture, and one is through befriending and respecting the captive, and even using things like MDMA to get them in the right state of mind, and then interrogating them. Would love you to cover these 3 points because you understand it more than anyone I've met.
Sure thing. So, right, torture does not work. Period. The problem with it is that sure, the subject may tell you what you want to know, but he's going to tell you so much else that you're not going to be able to figure out or to understand what's true and what's not true. And you're going to have to take the information that he gave you and turn it over to your analysts. And it may take them 6 months to figure out what's true and what's not true. And usually the information that you're seeking has a shelf life. You need the information as quickly as possible. Now, almost never is it that ticking time bomb scenario that we see in the movies, right? The bomb's
Sure.
going to be going off in 2 hours, and you've got to get the information in 2 hours to defuse the bomb as the clock is ticking down. That's only in Hollywood movies, not in real life. John McCain, former Senator John McCain, who was the 2008 Republican presidential nominee, was very famously or infamously tortured in North Vietnam when he was in the military during the Vietnam War. And in his memoir, he talked about, in the course of torture, they would start off with little things. What's your boss's name? Right? And the torture would just get worse and worse and worse. And he ended up telling them, just to get them to stop torturing him, he ended up telling them the names of the offensive linemen on the Green Bay Packers football team, right? The Vietnamese didn't know any different. They didn't really care what his boss's name was or his colleagues' names were. They wanted him to give them something, thinking that they had broken him. And in fact, they hadn't broken him. So after all that torture, they got names, they got the wrong names, and then they couldn't really do anything with it anyway. In the case of the United States, we were convinced that bin Laden et al. Were planning, bin Laden's words, an attack that would dwarf 9/11. And so people panicked. And this decision was made in October of 2001 to torture high-value targets, HVTs. But we got nothing to show for it. I will say that on the other hand, though, Ali Soufan, who is the Egyptian-American FBI agent who interrogated Abu Zubaydah, treated him with respect. You give him a cup of tea, a cigarette, an orange. If he's really helpful, paper and pencil to write to his mother. And it took a few weeks. Sometimes it can take months. Sometimes it can take a year. But you establish a rapport with the prisoner, and he tells you because he respects you, and you have shown respect to him. That's where we got the actionable information. So did we get information from these prisoners? The answer is yes. We got actionable information that saved American lives, but we got it from Abu Zubaydah, and we got it by establishing a rapport with him and speaking to him with respect, not through torture. Every time we would torture him, and this is clear, you can see it in the Senate torture report. Every single time we tortured him, he went silent, and he would stay silent for months.
Interesting. And was it it was the CIA that was torturing the FBI that was questioning and building rapport, correct? In
Correct.
the movie Zero Dark 30, again, I'm sorry referencing movies. It's the closest thing we have. So you see they did they did both. They would torture and then befriend. Is that how it works?
No.
Taking away all the Hollywood stuff. Okay, how
Yeah.
does it differ from what we see in the dramatized Zero Dark 30 type torture?
What happened in real life is Ali began interrogating him. We caught him in late March of 2002. He needed 6 weeks to heal from his gunshot wounds. During the capture, after I specifically told these morons not to shoot, they just opened fire on him and shot him 3 times in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach. Almost killed him. So he needed 6 weeks just to not be dead, right? So Ali began interrogating him around the 3rd of May, 2002. On August the 2nd, 2002, the CIA took over. Now, in that first period of interrogation with Ali, he gave us valuable information. He gave us the Al-Qaeda wiring diagram, which we had never known before. We didn't know how the organization was structured. He gave us the standard operating procedure for carrying out a terrorist attack, which we also didn't understand. And most importantly, is he gave us the name Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. We had never heard that name before. As soon as the CIA started torturing him on August the 2nd, 2002, he went silent. That torture lasted about 6 weeks. And then the FBI came back in, and Ali had to start from scratch again and rebuild that rapport. Abu Zubaydah was furious that he had been tortured. He had been humiliated and was just furious and didn't speak to Ali for weeks. Just as Ali is rebuilding that rapport, just as Abu Zubaydah is talking again, the CIA took over again and began torturing him, and he went silent for good.
Why didn't the torture work? I don't understand. Like, you're looking at human nature. If you want the pain to stop, shouldn't you just speak? It seems that it's easier to
Yeah,
not speak when you're being treated
and
well than
they
to
do
speak.
speak. They do speak, but they don't necessarily speak the truth. You're not a substantive expert. You don't have an analytic team with you. You're just a torturer. So you're beating me up. Says, what's your father's name? My father's name is Billy Joe Jim Bob. Okay, I gave you a name. Then you stop torturing me. My father's name is not Billy Joe Jim Bob. You know?
Hmm.
So they would ask him a question, beat him up. He'd give them an answer. They keep beating him up. Well, he realizes it's not the truth that they're after. They're just trying to break him. They called it learned helplessness. And I'll tell you, the reason why the CIA tortured Abu Zubaydah and KSM and other prisoners was to exact revenge, not to gather intelligence, because you can't gather intelligence that way. And then let me add one other point. I'm going to reiterate a point. You've got people watching the torture and taking copious notes. And then they send these notes back to headquarters. Here's everything that Abu Zubaydah said. 99.9% of it is bullshit. It's just, he's trying to get you to stop torturing him. So he's telling you anything that he thinks you might want to hear just to get you to stop. But then you send everything to headquarters to go over it. And then they start pouring through it. And it takes months for them to finally conclude, this was bullshit, that was bullshit. The other, oh, this part might be true. The rest of this is bullshit. And then by then, months have passed. And the next attack has taken place.
What's funny is that a lot of governments and organizations still use that technique to this day. I'm guessing the US has shifted techniques from the old days of post 9/11 torture techniques.
Yeah, a lot of things have happened since the CIA claims that it stopped torturing. The CIA said, in response to my revelations in 2007, that they had stopped torturing in late 2005. We don't know if that's true. We're just going to have to take their word for it. The Senate torture report was crystal clear that torture went on, that torture took place. It shouldn't have taken place. It went on for a long period of time, more than 5 years. And we did not get actionable intelligence because of it. There was a group of senior CIA officers who co-wrote a book together, like 6 of them. And they tried to justify the torture, saying, oh, it was the greatest thing ever, and we saved American lives, and some people have to take the tough decisions. It was all nonsense, just trying to save their reputations. But the rest of the world was appalled. They were appalled when this information became public. Several countries stopped cooperating with us because we were torturing prisoners in violation of international law, in violation of the United Nations. It's late in Spain. I'm in Spain right now. The United Nations Convention Against Torture and Inhumane and Degrading Treatment. And so it ended up doing us more damage than good. It was just it was a terrible decision that was made under duress, the duress of 9/11 and having to act to counter the next attack.
So we've talked about torture. We started talking about spycraft. I want to go back to spycraft because there's been a few developments that don't catch the news like they used to. Just there's so much going on today. There was in the last few days an Australian former executive at a US defense company. He was caught for selling sensitive information to Russia. I think
Yes.
money is one of the easier ways to gain sensitive information, just bribing.
Yeah,
UK
that's it.
police arrested 3
99% of
men.
people do it. Yeah.
Money. UK police arrested 3 men on suspicion of assisting a Russian intelligence. A lot of it is related to Russia. Polish authorities arrested 8 on suspicion of espionage, again, and preparing Russian-directed hybrid sabotage and reconnaissance missions. France charged 4 with plotting to assassinate a Russian dissident, Vladimir Oseshkin. And lastly, finally, China's Ministry of State Security accused the NSA. That's an interesting one. China's Ministry of State Security accused the NSA of targeting the National Time Service Center. Not sure if you've heard that one. which
No.
manages China's atomic clock for critical infrastructure like finance. I never heard of an atomic clock, telecom,
Oh, yeah.
and
The
defense, claiming.
US atomic clock is in Colorado.
So, what is an
Yeah.
atomic clock? How important is it? So, NSA has apparently tried to hack the Chinese one. What would that do if they were able to hack it?
It could wreck the national banking system. So the atomic clock is accurate to within something like 1/1000th of a second, right? In fact, you can go onto the shortwave radio bands. It used to be like 11,000 hertz or some, I think it was 11,000 hertz or 10,000, whatever it was. And you could hear beep, beep, beep. That's the atomic clock. And then every 10 or 20 years, they'll add a second to get it back on its exact, its exact line. But the reason we have these atomic clocks is mostly for international banking transactions. Like if the transfer has to be effected at 10:05, then by God, it's got to be 10:05, not a second past or a second before 10:05, 10:05. So, it's one of those things where countries are always fucking with each other. Excuse my language. This would be one of those incidents.
So my question to you: who's winning that fucking over each other? So we've given in the last few days, it's been the countries involved: Australia, the US, the UK, Poland, Russia, France, and China, and the NSA, and the US again.
And
Who's
there was another
winning
one,
that battle? Which one?
well, it's ongoing. There was another one. There was a think tank scholar was arrested in the United States 2 weeks ago and has been charged with espionage for spying on behalf of China. So you said something a moment ago that's true. 99% of people who spy for a foreign country are doing it for the money, and the money can be quite significant. A small handful of people will do it for ideology, just because if they're spying for the Chinese, they love Chinese communism, right? Or they're doing it
Or
for the
they have
Russians.
to. John, they have to legally. I found that out as well. Legally, if you're a Chinese or Russian citizen, and the intelligence services of those countries request you to comply, you legally
Yes,
have
sir.
to, or you face jail time. That is
You are right.
mental. That
Yeah,
is
that's
insane.
nuts.
So
That's
it
nuts.
says you
I'll
cannot
tell
trust any Russian or Chinese
no,
person in the
because
US.
you have to assume the worst. And then I'll tell you another thing. About 6 months ago, the New York Police Department of all organizations cracked this Chinese band of people where they had an office in the Soho area of Manhattan near Chinatown. But these were apparently, or what appeared to be, private Chinese citizens. They weren't government officials. They weren't intelligence officers. They were just private Chinese citizens going to Chinese dissidents and saying things like, hey, shut your mouth, or I'm going to break your father's ribs when I get back to China, and I'm going to rape your mother. And eventually, some of these dissidents went to the NYPD and said, hey, this has to be Chinese intelligence or whatever. It turned out to be a group of illegals, which is what we call Russian sleeper cells, right? They come to the United States. They get green cards in many cases. They get normal jobs. Maybe you're working in a bookstore, or you work in a garage, or you work at Macy's. And at night, you go out and threaten people on behalf of the Chinese intelligence service. That's called an illegal. We call them NOCs, non-official cover. So you are working for whatever country's intelligence service, but you do not have diplomatic cover. So in that case, if you're arrested, you're on your own. You're going to go on trial and you're going to go to prison. But then what usually happens is the Russian government or the Chinese government or whatever the country happens to be will very discreetly come and say, all right, you caught us. We admit this is illegal. How about if we make a trade? We'll give you some of your people and you give us some of our people. And that's how everybody ends up going home. The Russians and the Chinese, I'll point out, the Russians and the Chinese are the two countries that do that the most regularly.
So my team messaged me now. They said, and I'm not sure if they're right. So I asked people to fact check it. They said that China's pretty strict on this. So legally, you face 4 years or 6 years of jail. That's what I read earlier. Russia is not as strict and makes it seem more consensual or more cooperative. I'm not sure about this. I'll have them fact check it because I read something different today. But I was mainly focusing on China because this
Yeah.
is what worries me. Obviously, these are the two big superpowers. We've talked about it before. Um, how deep does it go? Because there was that story a few years ago.
Yeah.
There was that lady, the Maria Butina.
Fortunate.
She was, yeah, exactly, Butina. She's now back in Russia. I didn't know she was back in
Yes.
Russia, but she
She got
befriended a
elected
lot
to
of
the
U.S.
Duma.
politicians. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So what's the story? So she befriended a few U.S. politicians. She even managed to ask Trump a question in 2015, a pre-scripted question about Russia. So she got as close as Trump. She's got a picture, I think, with Don Jr., if I remember correctly. And she tried to befriend different politicians and people with influence. By She said, this is the exact quote: "I can offer sex in exchange for a position within special interest organizations." Um, so how many more Maria Butinas do you think there is, and who do you think is winning spycraft right now, China or the US?
I would say China. China's winning. There are probably hundreds of sleepers in the US. The Russians have been doing this for 100 years. Where I live in Arlington, Virginia, in the United States, and the last time the FBI disrupted a group of Russian sleepers, uh, many of them lived in Arlington, Virginia, walking distance from my house. And one of them, worked in a bookstore. One of them was married to an American guy who had no idea that he was married to a Russian deep cover KGB officer. No idea. There's a television series
Married.
that yeah, it's not on anymore. The Americans. It was on Netflix. It was wildly successful. And it's about that. It's about Russian sleepers who not only live among us in American society and culture, but their children are born in the United States, are American citizens. And then when they turn 17 or 18, the parents pull them aside and say, listen, things aren't as they seem. We're actually KGB, deep cover, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to send you back to Moscow for training. They want them so that they speak without accents. People just assume they're Americans, and they can infiltrate different parts of society, especially in a place like Washington, where everybody has something to do with the government. Either you work for the government or you work for a company that does business with the government or some associated organization, a think tank, the court system, whatever. And they spread out all across the country and they wait to be activated. So what happens is when they first get to the United States, they come with very discrete communications systems. For example, they will buy a dresser for the bedroom, and you take out one of the drawers in this strange way, and there's a little hook at the back, and you activate the hook, and there's a radio back there, and the radio will transmit your reports back to Moscow or back to Beijing, and that's how you communicate. In the event of an emergency, there's a handler that you can trigger an emergency meeting with, and the handler, you call the handler and you say, "Hi, is this the pizza place? I want a large pizza with sausage." That means meet me at midnight tomorrow at the park in Vienna, Virginia. And so then you can do the in-person meeting. The Chinese, though, are better at this than we are.
How
Yeah.
many? So going back to that initial story, the honeypots, Chinese honeypots in Silicon Valley. How many tech executives do you think that could have a girlfriend or even a wife right now? And I know you can't give a number, but do you think it's that how worried should we be that there's some of them right now that are married or in love with a spy? Because that report came in again, female spies, creating honeypot traps. They're Chinese and Russian ones, sending attractive women. So China and Russia sending attractive women that even marry tech leaders and steal secrets.
Yep.
And that includes secrets about satellites, missiles, defense, surveillance, and obviously AI.
Yes.
That seems
And
pretty
and not
pretty
just not
extraordinary.
just not just tech executives. We had a member of Congress from California who was the victim of a honeypot, what, 4 years ago? He had no idea that his girlfriend was a Chinese intelligence officer. And he's a member of Congress, for God's sake, who has jurisdiction over these tech issues on Capitol Hill. So, we have to assume that there are probably, a few dozen women out there having sex with tech nerds, just hoping to ingratiate themselves. And the tech nerds are probably thinking, God, how did I get such a beautiful woman? Oh my God, I'm a lucky guy. I never thought I could get a woman so beautiful. Well, guess what? You didn't. She targeted you, and she's downloading your computer when you are in the shower or when you go to work in the morning and sending it
But
to
John, what
China.
about with all the technology that's available today? And I was just listening to quotes by Larry Ellison about how citizens will be he said the following quote: "Citizens will be on their best behavior because we'll be constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on." Talking about AI and the developments there. And obviously, we're seeing what Palantir is able to do now. Um, what is happening to spycraft now with AI and with the mass surveillance that we're seeing? Because I know that the CIA,
Wow.
you've talked about it. The CIA, I've disconnected my TV after you said that, and I've got the
Uh-huh.
Faraday cages all over my house. But I've kind of given up, to be honest. So so first, the CIA can essentially hack to any CIA and other forms and other intelligence organizations could hack to your phone, your laptop, your TV, and be able to listen to you, your cameras, etc. So first, maybe talk about spycraft with the AI, with surveillance, and then we can talk about ways that people could avoid being surveyed. That's another fascinating question that interests me personally.
This is a tough question. Ed Snowden told us in the summer of 2013 that this was happening and that Americans had no idea that it was happening and that we should be trying to protect ourselves and to protect our information. Ed Snowden told us in 2013, for example, that NSA could routinely hack into your laptop, turn your camera on, and just watch what you're doing in the room. And the camera doesn't light up, right? It doesn't, there's no little green light up there when NSA is doing it. And they can just watch you do it. And the reason that he said this is because there were NSA officers activating their ex-girlfriend's cameras and just watching them, take their clothes off, come out of the shower, having sex with their new boyfriends, whatever. It's illegal to do that, but it exposed the technology. So it's more than 10-year-old technology. You know how quickly technology develops. You're a tech entrepreneur. In 2017, thanks to Joshua Schulte, a former CIA software engineer who apparently released or was convicted of releasing what are now known as the Vault 7 documents, he showed us how much farther the CIA had gone just between 2013 and 2017 in controlling the technology in our homes. Like you, I have to admit that I've kind of thrown my hands up and I give up.
Yeah.
If they really, I quote this book all the time, Mario. There's a book written by Dr. Harvey Silverglate, a professor of law at Harvard, called 3 Felonies a Day. And he says that we are so overregulated, we are so overcriminalized in the United States that the average American on his or her average day, going about his or her normal business, commits 3 felonies every single day. With the point being, if they want to get you, they're going to get you. And there's nothing you can do to protect yourself. Well, in part, it's because of the technology that's been developed that we now use in our own homes. For example, these Amazon Alexas, right? How cool is it? You just roll over in bed and say, hey, turn on ESPN, or Alexa, play 70s music or whatever. But the way that it does that is that it has to constantly listen. It's listening for its name so that it can activate itself. But if it's constantly listening, that means that it's listening to literally everything that's happening in your home. Everything.
Same for your phone, Siri.
Same for your phone, exactly. Yeah, you just say the name and it comes on. You just said it and mine came on. Exactly.
There you go. There
Yeah,
you go. Did your phone just come on?
yeah,
This is
it just lit up. It lights up in these
this
pretty
is
rainbow colors. Yeah, there you go.
so it shows that you put your hands up because you still have Siri activated and you're former CIA. You know this more than anyone. And I agree with you. And I was speaking to Kevin Ship, who's also
Oh, Kevin's
a former
fantastic.
CIA officer.
Yeah,
Incredible guy, heartbreaking stories. His story is
terrible.
insane. John,
Yeah,
it is insane. I couldn't believe it, and I was, his son is still missing, and I almost brought me to tears. Um, but he said something. We talked about Charlie Kirk and the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and there's all these theories floating around. But a lot of people, I interviewed PBD, Patrick Bet-David, and Pierce Morgan right after the assassination, and both of them, especially Patrick Bet-David, talked about how they've really upped their security. And Patrick talked about how the FBI called him right after the assassination, told him he's on a list of 50 names that could be next to be assassinated or targeted. And
oh,
I asked Kevin, like, how could someone protect himself? He's like, Mario, we talk about surveillance and everyone's trying to see how they cannot be watched anymore. But that's pretty much impossible unless you just
mhm,
want to tune out of technology and you'll be at a massive disadvantage. And he's like,
yeah,
there's an advantage. And I want to get your thoughts on it, John, because you've talked about that Mossad operation that happened in Dubai. It's a crazy story. I know you've talked about it a few times. And I'm talking to you from Dubai now. And I was in a five-star hotel, locked door. But he said something interesting. He's like, one of the best things you could do is always be public. So having cameras watch you, someone film you, having a recording there, because it makes it very hard for anyone to target you, for anyone to
right,
frame you. So if you're privately with a girl speaking and you've got like a recorder on and the girl starts to make certain claims, but you've got, I've got something called Limitless. I've got it here. I'm going to start wearing it. It's a necklace that records everything you say. It's an AI necklace, so it can take notes for you and all that. So I was wearing it for a few days, and now I'm talking to our legal counsel to make sure I can because our company's going public, etc. But moving aside from that, so he said, if the more you record yourself, the more you have video, audio recordings, the harder it is to frame you, the harder it is to target you. Um, that was an interesting take. I would love to get your thoughts on it. How people could avoid being targeted, not only targeted, getting killed, but targeted and being framed for something as, you've been framed. Hold on, you're the best person to answer this. You were surveyed for years and years in order to try to frame you for espionage. So
yeah,
you were the target of that for many, many years. You worked in the CIA for what, about 10 whatever years.
15
So
years,
that
yeah.
you'd be perfect to answer that question. How could someone avoid what you faced?
The way I avoided it was just by telling the truth. So what you're referring to is kind of a terrible story. Uh, when I was working for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I was the senior investigator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And one of the things I loved about that job was that it was similar to my CIA jobs in that I had ready access to foreign diplomats, and foreign diplomats would call me and say, "Hey, let's have lunch." Excuse me, and I would jump at the chance always, right? So you have lunch with this diplomat and this ambassador and that guy and whoever. So I got a call from a man who identified himself as the number three in the Japanese embassy in Washington. His English was absolutely terrible, but he said, "Ana أتكلم عربي." I speak Arabic. And I said, "وأنا أتكلم اللغة العربية." I speak Arabic too. Okay, let's meet in Arabic. So he said, "Let's have lunch." We went to Charlie Parker Steakhouse, I think is the name of it, on Capitol Hill. And I remember that lunch very, very well. We talked about Israeli elections, Turkish elections. We talked about the Middle East peace process. And then at the end of the lunch, he said, "What's next for you?" And I said, "Well, I think actually I'm going to resign soon. I promised Senator Kerry." John Kerry was the chairman of the committee at the time. This was before he became Secretary of State. I said, "I promised Secretary Kerry that I'd give him 2 years. It's been 2.5. I have 5 children at home, and I need to make some money and send my kids to college." And he says, "No, don't do that. If you give me information, I can give you money." And I said, "What the fuck's wrong with you making a pitch like that? Shame on you. You have any idea how many times I've made that pitch? How dare you?" And I got up and I walked out indignantly. And I went straight to the office of the Senate security officer. So I said to him, "Listen, I was just pitched by a foreign intelligence officer." He said, "Was it that Russian again?" And I said, "No, it was Japanese." He goes, "Japanese?" I said, "I know, right?" And he says, "Well, sometimes the Japanese poke around just to see what our trade negotiating positions are. He said, sit at this standalone computer, write up what happened, and then I'll give it to a courier to take to the FBI. So I did. The next day he calls me and he says, the FBI is going to send up 2 agents to interview you. I said, okay. So these 2 FBI agents show up the next day. I meet with them in the Senate Security Office again. And they said, here's what we want you to do. Call him back, invite him to lunch, and try to get him to tell you exactly what information he wants and how much he's willing to pay for it. I said, okay. And because I'm a patriot, I said, do you want me to wear a wire? And they said, no, we'll be at the next table to listen. And I said, but he doesn't speak English. He only speaks Arabic. And they said, that's okay. We have a guy that speaks Arabic and we'll have him with us. I said, fine. So I call him. He agrees to lunch. And then the FBI calls me and says, on second thought, we can't make it. Something came up. Just do the lunch and then write us another memo. So I wrote them another memo. Then they asked me to do it a 3rd time and a 4th time and a 5th time. And in the 5th meeting, he told me that he had just gotten promoted. He got his dream job and he was going to be the number 2 in the Japanese embassy in Cairo. And I said, congratulations. And I shook his hand, never saw him again. A year later, I've been arrested. And my attorneys get 15,000 pages of classified discovery from the FBI. And what we find in these 15,000 pages, among other things, was that there never was any Japanese diplomat. He was an FBI agent pretending to be a Japanese diplomat. He didn't speak Japanese, but he spoke Arabic and figured he could fake his way through by pretending to have bad English. It got to the point where one of them wrote a memo to Peter Strzok, the one who tried to go after Donald Trump. Peter Strzok was the head of counterintelligence at the FBI till he was fired and escorted out of the building. But
sued them.
He wrote to Peter Strzok and he said, recommend we end this operation. He's clearly not going to take the bait. So I said to my attorney, why would they do something like this? I'm a patriot. And he said, because they have a shit case and they know it's shit and they tried to frame you. They tried to get me to commit actual espionage because they really, really wanted to charge me with espionage. They ended up charging me with 3 counts of espionage anyway. And those counts were thrown out because I hadn't committed espionage. But I foiled them by
being
reporting
honest.
all the information back to the FBI.
So like the more we're talking about surveillance, but it seems like the more someone's transparent and that accepts their fate, that privacy is dead, the harder it is to frame you, the harder it is to take you out. So that's what I've been saying.
That's it right there. That's it right there.
Because Tucker,
yes.
I got it from Tucker one day. He said in an interview, he was talking about how he knows his phone is hacked because the battery started dying very quickly. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
yes,
I think you know the story. And then he said, I just accepted the fact that I'm always going to be listened to and I'm fine with it because I've got nothing to hide. And I've accepted that same fact. What is there going to be a recording of, me sleeping with my loved one or me arguing with my loved one or me making some some dark jokes? That's the worst case. So as long as you're above board and I accept privacy is dead.
May I add something? I don't think I've ever told this story publicly, but it's been at the front of my mind. So I subscribe to this email service called readnotify.com. You know Read Notify.
Yeah, I know the story. It's an incredible story. Incredible. I recommend everyone use it. I love that story.
It out. So I wanted to do a Freedom of Information Act request because I wanted to, I was thinking of writing a book about a former NSA agent who in his spare time became a science fiction writer, quite an important one. He made movies in Hollywood and then he committed suicide in the late 1950s. So I wanted to do this Freedom of Information Act request. And I've got a friend, Jason Leopold. He's a wonderful, extremely accomplished investigative reporter at Bloomberg. And he's the king of the FOIAs. He's filed more FOIA requests than any other person on earth, to the point where the spokesman from the Pentagon called him a FOIA terrorist. He's the one who broke the Hillary Clinton email story, for example, just by filing a Freedom of Information Act request. So I wanted to get it right. So I called him and I said, Jason, I want to do this FOIA request. Can you walk me through it? And he said, no, why don't you just send it to me? He said, I'll do it so quickly, you won't have to do anything. I said, okay. So I had his email. So I wrote, Jason Leopold at whatever at the time, I forget where he was, LA Times or whatever, .com.readnotify.com. Now, with the read notify tag, which is $36 a year, it's cheap. It'll say, Jason opened your email at this time from this location. He read the email for 33 seconds and then he deleted it, or he filed it, or he forwarded it, or he reopened it again 5 minutes later, or, whatever. It tells you everything. So I sent him the email, and just a moment later, my phone goes bling. So I got a read notify notification. So I look at it and it says, your email was accessed in Washington, D.C. at such and such a coordinate. And I thought, that's funny because Jason's not in Washington. He's in Beverly Hills, California. So I call him on Signal and I said, Jason, are you in Washington? And he said, no, I'm home. I'm in Beverly Hills. Why? And I said, because I put a read notify tag on the email. I always do. And I got a notification that it had been accessed in Washington. He said, I haven't opened it yet. It wasn't me. I said, hold on a second. I'm going to cut the geo coordinates out and I'm going to put it in Google Earth. So while he was on the phone with me, I did that. Google Earth, it starts from space and it kind of goes around in circles and then goes down to the location. And it shows me a picture of the FBI's Washington field office. And I said, the FBI accessed the fucking email. And he said, are they on you or are they on me? And I said, it would be illegal for them to be on you, even if you're the king of the FOIA terrorist. I said, they're probably on me. Now, there was no warrant to intercept my emails. I wasn't accused of any crime. I had gotten out of prison and I was already out for 6 months when I did this. But the FBI does what the FBI wants to do. They don't have to follow the rules or the laws if they don't want to. And who's going to call them on it? If I said, oh, the FBI is hacking into my email, people are going to say, okay, have a nice day. Nobody cares.
Yeah. My conclusion is that if you're on the list, there is not much you could do. And you talked about the author that you were covering is someone that committed suicide. What's funny is that what me and Kevin Shipp were talking about. So Kevin Shipp was the one I was having a discussion with, is that a lot of people post, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of the latest ones to post that. They post the fact that, hey, I will never kill myself, or I'm not suicidal. I think the best way to avoid being Epsteined is also always being surveyed.
Yes.
One last thing I want to ask you about, and that's something you haven't talked about much. And what was your time like in prison? And were you worried? Because I know when the FBI first searched your home and you know what you're being charged with, and you could face life in prison or the death penalty. I think it was life in prison. You correct me if I'm wrong, but you felt suicidal.
Oh yeah.
I can relate to the feeling, not the suicidal feeling, but the feeling when the world feels like it's falling apart. Everything's falling apart, and we're not expecting it at all. So you went to jail. Were you worried there? Were you worried that they could take it a step further, or
they actually tried to take it a step further? Yeah, they actually tried to take it a step further. I ended up getting 23 months in prison. So my lead attorney told me just as I was leaving for prison, he said, listen, my contacts at the FBI tell me that they are furious that you only got 23 months. I was looking at 45 years, which was a death sentence. I was already, in my late 40s. I was 49 when I went to prison. So he said, they're furious that you got such a short sentence. So listen, he said, I'm telling you as a friend, be very, very careful because they're going to try to act against you. And I said, okay. I didn't really know what that meant, but I'm going to be on my highest alert. So I'm in prison for a couple of months. Yeah, about 2 months. And a guy who lived in my cell block. He was a nice guy. He was from Afghanistan. Came to the United States as a young child, so spoke English like you and I do. And he was a pharmacist who unfortunately had a problem with oxy. And so it was a federal crime. They charged him with trafficking. He got like 14 years. But he was a sweet guy. He comes up to me one day and he said, "Hey, John, there's a new guy who wants to meet you. He's the spokesman for the Taliban." I said, "The spokesman for the Taliban? Are you talking about that case from New Jersey?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I don't want to talk to that guy. I don't have anything to say to that guy." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "No, want nothing to do with him. He's a legitimate Talib. I'm not interested. I got nothing to say." And he said, "Okay, I'll tell him." A couple of days later, I'm out in the yard, just walking around the track. And this obviously Afghan guy with a beard almost down to his waist walks toward me with his hand out like this to shake my hand. And I put my hands up like this and I said, "Don't fucking touch me." And as I'm looking at him, I look past him, and just past him in the woods is one of the guards with a camera with a long range lens on it. Click, 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 click. They're trying to trap me. I knew that the guy was going to like try to hug me or whatever to make it look like I flipped and I went with the Taliban. And I said, "So help me God, I will fucking kill you if you try to touch me." And he goes, "Come on, man. We have a lot in common." I said, "We have nothing in common. I spent most of my life trying to kill people like you. So get the fuck away from me." And he backed off. And I noticed that the guard put the camera down because my hands are still in the air and I'm telling him, "I'm going to fucking kill you." And then the guy walked away. Well, miracle of miracles, he transferred out of the prison 2 days later. So I said to one of my cellmates, "Isn't it amazing that the spokesman for the Taliban is transferred to our prison and he's only here for 4 days? I wonder why that happened. I wonder how that could be." Well, that was because they were trying to set me up so they could charge me with espionage again and then announce to the Washington Post and the New York Times that I had switched sides and I was with the Taliban, and then they're going to charge me with terrorism.
John, you've spent your life working with the CIA, targeting people that were targeting the US, including the Taliban, Al Qaeda.
Correct.
And because you spoke the truth, now they could be pissed off about it. Fine, that's understandable. They targeted you, and they even worked with your enemy, America's enemy, the Taliban, to try to frame one of their own. Like the only craziest story I know is Kevin Shipp and his family being transferred to a house that's being poisoned to
A
try to
poison
kill
house.
him.
Yes.
That
A
is
poison house.
insane. How
Yeah.
could the CIA and FBI expect to continue getting recruits when they treat their own that way? Like,
That's
how
a
could
good question.
how could an
That's a good
intelligence
question. Yeah.
organization get this corrupted? It's sad to see because again, the CIA and the FBI are there to defend the world's biggest democracy, and if you're a believer in democracy, you should be vouching for those intelligence organizations. And I remember when I was younger, when I was watching movies, I always wanted the FBI and the CIA to win. But then you hear
Yeah.
stories what they've done to people like yourself.
Right.
It's sad to see. It's sad to see. John, always a pleasure to speak to you and appreciate your efforts and what you
Pleasure's
do.
mine.
And
Thank
would
you.
love to have you on the show again. Thanks for coming on at such a late
It
time
would
in
be my
Salamanca.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.